going to talk a little bit more about the test cases that we were running from the previous video, where I was showing some maybe less than awesome directory structure for the thing and trying to go about it one way and not using the test suite. And I showed some output report that was not as nicely formatted. It was ungrouped and a little raw. And we're going to go through and talk about the test wrapper and a config file, and then running getting this kind of output out of the PHP unit, and then also maybe even looking at some, the guts of some of the unit test cases here. So to start, let's take a look at the shell script that wraps up the whole business here. Shell script is this thing. It's in the same root as our test application here, test blah 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 blah, and there's a test.sh file that exists in the root of the thing. It gets into itself, runs PHP Unit using the default PHP Unit config file, PHP Unit XML. We'll take a look at it in a second. And then it runs our Xslt processor, and then writes a fairly simple HTML landing page for the directory that contains some output from the PHP test run. Right here's the PHP Unit config file. We pointed at a Bootstrapper. We set a couple of defaults that we like. You might want to change this for your own conditions. Got some config variables that need to go in there. We've got the details about, these are all used by the environment in those test scripts, which we'll take a little look at in just a little bit. And then down here is a section called test suites, which initially I had tried to do get along without actually defining this section and just hoping PHP Unit would magically load all the files in my directory structure in a nice way. It does that, but it doesn't give me the ability to give nice names to it visibly to managers and other non-technical folks who might want to be looking at the outputs from some of this stuff. So here I can change it to some nice English looking names. I can still have my directory structure, and I'm still sort of a fan of using these numeric prefixes on there. As I get into the testing directory, for example, here I can just order my test with that. So maybe I'm talking to someone on my team, and now I can say there's a problem, it's in test 4.3, and they can just kind of quickly reference in their own mind, well, that's obviously this 1 in 4, and it's this. Now these other words come along afterwards that help them know, oh, we're trying to do a test about collecting too much raw material off of one of the plants. Long story. Anyways, now I write test suites because I like to look at nice names in those output files. And way down here at the log is where we say do this PHP Unit output file, and we have our test docs output as well. We'll take a quick look at that one here in a second. Right over here is the directory of all those, all of those things in the other file, and our Bootstrapper right there, which is fairly simple. For us, this Bootstrapper simply references the top level application Bootstrap to pull that in, since some of the test cases depend on some application layer code. Anyways, then we just run test sh, and you let it run, and lots of stuff is failing. We're running against a machine that's designed to show some breakages. Some spew went by right here showing some output from the system. That's output directly from the test cases. And then you can see loads and loads of these failed, and it looks like when we are glancing at these, they're all failing for the same reason. Something as asserting that a null is of type array. That looks like to me right now, of course, very likely to be just we're using the wrong assertion at some point, but we'll be able to get in there and dig into that. And then right here we've got this summary output. Oh, let's take a step back. This is that page that's generated, the HTML that's generated by that test wrapper. And now we'll just say I want that pretty report. Here's that pretty report that comes out, and we can see those same messages that were logged here are now available in a very large or reasonably large HTML file. And then this test docs format one is really nice. It's very, very simple. Do you want to see gray, gray, gray? I think that's gray. Maybe that's green. But you want to see no red. How about that? We'll talk about no red. And there's got to be something we can do about these product names. I think it's just trimming the word test off of the end, or something. I'm not too sure, but we can adjust our class names, and again, we still got to adjust some of our name spacing on some of those files to fix that stuff. And let's jump in there and take a look. Right here is one of the test cases. It's case 4.1, wet, dry, raw test case. It looks like I'm intending to go all the way through a harvest cycle with this one. And right here you can see where we're using some of those environmental variables that are set in the config file. They're all available right here. So each script can authenticate without, of course, having to hard code any kind of keys into the test cases, which would be nice to, of course, have them be flexible enough. And then we've got a test case here. This is our first one. This setup routine is going to run before every single test case runs, so it's always refreshing this one before each one of these test functions run. Like I say, PHP Unit's just going to hit everything with a name that starts with test. This one's going to identify a random plant from the system, and then here we're going to go through and issue a post to the collect endpoint, and this post is being handled by a wrapper component that we've constructed to make our lives a little bit easier. We also have this custom assertion that we've created, assert valid response, that says I want this to be this to be this, and it's just a little wrapper, so we don't have to write the same 6 assertions over and over and over. And then we do step 1, do step 2, do step 3, bunch of assertions. Like test cases are very, very simple code. Do the thing, and then assert all of the stuff that you want to be true is true. There's no conditionals. You don't have to write like, oh, if the count is 2, then do this other thing. The count should be 2 every single time. If it's not 2, there's a problem, and the test case should stop. And the test case would stop running right at that moment, and it doesn't go any further. So you'll see those stops in there. In fact, you have to fix each assertion before you can move on to the next one. And then right over here is the Xslt file that influenced us for making the Xslt file that we have. And this one's quite good. He's got a nice big screenshot that we can see here. Oh boy, zoom in and enhance. I guess it's a little scrambled, but it's got a nice table of the grouping and the tests and all of those other details. We've modified that one a little bit to get this output that you see here. I mean, I basically changed this theme to Bootstrap and, changed those colors from a custom font to just, or styling, to just use, text-danger and text, I forget what that is, text success or some nonsense like that. And this is the Xslt processor we've got. You see I'm referencing that guy's GitHub. Just that we got the influence from, oh yeah, I'm using Font Awesome, which I'm probably not even using any fonts in here, and then Twitter Bootstrap. Just force of habit, we got that Font Awesome in there because it is awesome. Do a little style tweak right here. And then if you're not familiar with Xslt, it's sort of a unique beast. The way it works, if you think about it like it's processing a document, it starts right here with this template match 0 after we set some variables in the top, and then all of the stuff that's inside of these XSL template elements, which terminates right down here on line 90, are then processed. So in this one, I'm putting out some HTML that you probably know and love. And then inside we have this other command that says apply templates, which I'm not 100% sure on, but I think what that is doing is telling it to run all of the other stuff that hasn't run at least once, because what it appears to do right after that is to first hit this template right here and draw those test totals at the top. Then it hits this other single one right here. Wait, maybe it hits that one. No. Maybe it hits this one first because it sees that this one matches this other one up here and knows to fit this template inside of here and not to fit it anywhere else. And so after it's processed from the inside out, whatever's left with apply templates there is shown at the top. I've tried to change this a little bit without as much success as I wanted to get to be able to sort of show the processing of the XSL document in a little different way, and for whatever reason I haven't been able to get that all the way dialed in like I really want it to be, but This is not a terrible output. It's got those nice little hyperlinks, so I can jump down here and see that, here it looks like the application is actually barfing all over the place. And this one's handy to show because it's coming from one of our internal test cases. I'm wrong about that. I said internal test cases, but I meant it comes from this internal test component that we have, which, oops, up there, it's in the wrong namespace. And here's that test case, and this is also getting run for some reason, and I'm not entirely sure why that's happening. But here's that wrapper called assert valid response. It doesn't have the same signature as other assertions. It grabs the body. If you pass in a dump parameter, it uses that as a trigger to dump the raw response output, just helpful for one-off debugging, and then also uses whatever you supplied as a dump as like a string tag that you can put in there. I'll show you another trick I use with that. And then of course it does the work that we normally need to do for any response. We need to get that JSON. We need to make sure the response code is what we want. We want the header to look like the header we want it to look like. This may need to get changed on whatever REST API you're integrated with, because there may be like a char set attribute that's on here. There's some other attributes, especially other response headers, especially in the cannabis space, where that thing shows something like text/JSON, and there's another one where it's actually text/JSON and JSON is capitalized. So just something to be aware of. Just make sure that everything is tidy like we want. I guess we could add a couple of other assertions there. But that's for every other part of the application or every other part of the test cases now. You can get a response and then you can just run this one, wraps up all of that other stuff. Of course, if it doesn't work, the test case would stop right here. But now its return value, the response has been modified to be a sanitized just the JSON content, whereas right here, this is the PSR7 compatible response object that we're working with from Guzzle. So if there was maybe some other tests you wanted to make directly on the Guzzle response before processing the JSON body of the response, you could add those assertions in right here. PHP Unit's got a pretty good chapter in their book about, in their manual. This is the old rev. Hey, let's find the new one. Oh, we got to start all over. Well, damn shit. Anyway, assertions is in here, and there's another thing I wanted to pay attention to. Give me half a second. And the next time we come back after this video about PHP Unit test running, we're going to talk about this thing that back in the day used to be called test listener and has been modified now. All of these listeners, and here's a deprecation notice right here, don't do listeners anymore. They're now moved on to extensions. In the config file, and they're still listed here under extending PHP Unit, extending the test runner, and doing this kind of work. So we're going to take a look at that on the next one.